Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Abdul Wahid. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Paul and audience.
Good to see you again, sir. You're most welcome to come back on Blogging Theology. For those who don't know, Abdul Wahid has been active in Muslim affairs in the UK for over 25 years. He has been published on the websites of Foreign Policy, Open Democracy, the Times Higher Educational Supplement, and Prospect Magazine. And you can follow him on X/Twitter. I'll put the handle in the description below. Now, very recently, you wrote a fascinating and very bold article, which I'll just put on the screen now, about which we're going to be talking and issues arising from it. So this is your Substack. So do subscribe to his articles. Very, very interesting. And you boldly claim that Keir Starmer's declaration of recognition for a Palestinian state, which happened a few days ago, is a sap to his critics, a distraction from the real issues, and the continuation of a policy to legitimize the Zionist occupation. Recognize genocide, Mr. Starmer, and your part in it. That's dated the 21st of September, and there's a picture there of the aforementioned and the president of Israel. So it's very, very bold. It's not a very long article, but it's packed full of insight, I think. And there's a fascinating video about the King David Hotel, a good example of Zionist terrorism. This is a British film. It's only a couple of minutes long. We might look at that. And then you talk about UK complicity in genocide. So what a sort of a slightly redundant question, but what prompted you to write this article?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Well, we couldn't have missed what happened this weekend with the UN General Assembly. And Britain, France, Canada, Australia, and others all recognizing a Palestinian state in principle. And there will be people out there that have been celebrating this as something positive. Finally, these Western states are doing something for the Palestinians. But truthfully, when Emmanuel Macron first proposed this a few months ago, and then Starmer repeated it a few weeks ago, it was very obvious that this was not any kind of sincere attempt to help the Palestinians. When they are almost 2 years into a genocide, by all accounts since March this year, all experts have said there has been an attempt to deny them basic aid and food and water, so people are malnourished and starving. It makes absolutely no sense that, what you decide to do to help is, in principle, recognize the idea of a Palestinian state. Hence the title, Recognize Genocide, Mr. Starmer, not some theoretical state entity, which we can go into the details about why that's flawed as well. And your part in it, because let's face it, this genocide couldn't have happened without Western complicity. Israel relies on billions of dollars of military aid from the United States, but hundreds of millions of pounds of military aid from Britain. And military licenses have been granted to Israel, and even parts for F-35 fighter jets, which have been used in Gaza. There's reports of British officers training Israeli soldiers in the way that they have been complicit in fighting in Gaza. There's intelligence cooperation. There's diplomatic protection for them. I went into some of these things in the article. So it made absolutely no sense to me that these states in the world are talking about recognizing this theoretical state. It's just a distraction. We have spent the last 2 days talking about this when, frankly, the estimates are something in the region of 90 or 100 at least on conservative estimates. Palestinians have been killed. whilst the Zionist genocidal force that's trying to be occupying the center of Gaza City. So for all those reasons, I thought this needs addressing and needs exposing, as well as some of the comments that have been said about it. So you focused on a tweet I did a few days ago. The chief rabbi of the UK, Ephraim Mervis, wrote a piece saying that this recognition of a Palestinian state would be a reward for terrorism. Mm-hmm. And I thought this is coming a bit rich. I mean, number one, if there was ever a reward for terrorism, it's the state of Israel. Hence the newspaper clip I've put there about the infamous King David hotel in Jerusalem, which was bombed by Zionist terrorists in the 1930s. And alongside that, that old newsreel that talked about that. So in 1946, that happened, and the 2 years later they recognise a Zionist state. And if you follow the logic that he's saying, then the Abraham Accords and the normalization by the Arab and Muslim states with the Zionist occupation, though that would be the mother of all rewards for genocide, then, wouldn't it? I mean, it's such hypocrisy that people come out with when they're talking about this subject.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is you say it's a theoretical acknowledgement of the existence of a Palestinian state. It is. It's kind of just diplomatic words, really. But what's interesting is the incredible blowback, the hostility, the anger coming from the Israeli government and Netanyahu, who's condemned France and Britain and others in very, very strong language indeed. So it clearly has provoked them. It's upset them. They're angry. So it's not just a rhetorical thing. And I can only guess it's because it further isolates Israel in the global community. Actually, so it has that kind of sting about it. It's not just purely theoretical. Although I agree with you, the genocide continues, and Britain has, it's hardly a noble venture in that context, but it has provoked a very powerful reaction, which just is more than just a theoretical thing for the Israelis, at least.
So let's go to the root of why France, Britain, and others have done this, and why, quote unquote, Israel, shorthand term for an occupation rather than a state, is upset about this. Back at the very outset of the genocide, just after October 2023, by the time the death count had gone into the thousands within weeks in Gaza, Dominique de Villepin, former French Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, was very public in saying, we have to denounce what Israel is doing. We cannot possibly countenance the level of the war crimes and the targeting of civilians that they're doing, and pretend that we believe in international law and pretend that we are the civilized world. Yeah. He said very early on, if we in the West don't take a moral stand on this, we will lose credibility in the world, and that will be a disaster for us.
Of course.
And actually, it's surprised me to some extent as to how long it's taken Britain, for example, to come out with anything which is even vaguely moral in its outlook and its stance on what's happening in Gaza. It has defended Israel like nobody's business. I mean, Starmer went as far as saying that it was acceptable to cut off water and electricity to Gaza, to a civilian population. Yeah. And then he caveated it by saying, but of course we have to do it within the terms of international law, when effectively what he's saying is we have to break international law, we have to commit a war crime, but as long as we do it within the bounds of international law. It's a nonsensical statement that he made, but actually a lot of people called him out for that and said he could find himself in big trouble in the future, because he's come out with a statement which is effectively encouraging the war crimes that are happening. So a lot of people think that it have been very surprised that Britain has taken the stance it has. And I think part of the motivation for this has been to try and show that it is a moral country, that it has some dignity about how it looks at world affairs. And even that is rubbish when you look at the fact that the Balfour Declaration itself in 1917 talked in terms of both the new migrant population of Jews coming from Europe and the indigenous population would have their rights protected. It didn't talk in terms of a two-state solution, but it talked in terms of two peoples there that both need to have rights protected. And Britain has really never, ever, ever fulfilled that. And David Lammy said this weekend, we are now fulfilling what we said we would do in the Balfour Declaration. And I thought, how can you do that with a straight face? How can you pretend that you've done something with integrity when actually what you've done is over a century late, if that? So that's one of the motivations for the Western side. Now, the Israeli anger, you got in their own mind, they want to be part of the democratic world. They keep bragging and boasting that the only democracy in the Middle East, this guy who you've got in the middle of the photo, Isaac Herzog, their president, he's a war criminal if ever there was one. He's a man who basically said that there are no civilians. He was talking about the fact that, he was trying to argue that even the civilians in Gaza, they elected for Hamas and they give them protection by allowing them to use civilian facilities for their attacks. So right at the outset, he, by the way, as somebody who the UN recently has said was inciting genocidal rhetoric at the outset of all of this. So he was just hosted in Downing Street and in London just in the last few days, literally. He was here saying, Israel is a democratic state. We have elections, we have courts that overrule our politicians and all these kind of things. But that is how they see themselves. So if the rest of the world is saying they're war criminals and they're genocidal and they're starving a civilian population and all this, they don't like that. They really, really, really don't like that. And their anger is that these countries that are their allies and their backers see that it's in Israel's interests to rein them in. That's really what they're trying to do here. This is why I say that this is in part of a process to legitimize the Zionist entity as a real state, because this is France and Britain and other allies, Australia, Canada, trying to rein in the excesses of the current government, whilst endorsing the existence of this occupation and the subjugation of the Palestinian people. That's how I see it. I don't know if that's clear in the way I've framed that.
No, I don't disagree particularly. I was just pointing out that the blowback, it's been quite fierce, actually, fiercer than I expected. So that it has hit a nerve, clearly. But indeed, you've given context, I think, for that. Do you want to add? Shall we add to the stage some of your slides? Yeah,
because they'll help me illustrate some of my points a bit better. I'm not going to go through all of them, but effectively, I call this two-state solution a lie because it's unreal and unworkable, unjust and unacceptable and un-Islamic, and it's not going to save a single life. And the proof that it's an unreal promise is literally this point about recognizing genocide. This article in The Guardian is the 9th of September, and we are recording this on the 23rd of September. So you're talking about just over a fortnight. The then Foreign Secretary, who's now the Deputy Prime Minister, concluded that is not concluded that Israel is carrying out a genocide in Gaza. Okay, so they're not willing to recognize genocide, but they're willing to recognize this theoretical entity. Okay, that's a very important point people need to realize. here's another interesting point in international law. There's something called the Montevideo Convention of 1933, which is used by international lawyers to define what a state actually is. In international law, a state, to be credible, has to have a permanent population, a defined territory and government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. All right. So this state of Palestine, which has been recognized this week, well, the population was never allowed to be permanent, because in 1948, huge numbers of Palestinians were expelled in the Nakba. More Palestinians live outside of Palestine today than they do within it. The people of Gaza are being forced here and there, and are at very great risk of being expelled if you listen to the rhetoric of the current Israeli government and Donald Trump, where he's suggesting that they all get moved to different Arab countries so that they can build this Gaza Riviera. So the permanent population part, they have done their best to try and make sure it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. There is no defined territory. And we'll come to this in a moment when I show you some pictures of what the West Bank looked like. There is no real government. They're talking, all politicians in the West, they either talk about Hamas being an illegitimate government and Mahmoud Abbas's Palestinian Authority being a corrupt government that doesn't command respect within Palestine. So they don't really have a government there to work with. And the capacity to enter into relations with other states, well, whilst this measure they've talked about recognizing Palestine allows them to have diplomatic missions and embassies in different countries, but one way a state enters into relations with another state is through diplomacy and warfare when you have to. And we are being told from day one that this Palestinian state must be a demilitarized state. It must be unable to defend itself. Mm-hmm. And by that token, its capacity to enter into relations with other states is weak from day one. Every other state, even Lebanon, even probably Monte Carlo, all right, all these, Monaco, sorry, not Monte Carlo, but tiny states like Monaco, even they have some kind of armies. Lebanon has an army. So we're told that the fledgling state of Palestine must never be allowed to militarize. That was something Macron said this weekend. That was something Starmer said this weekend. So its capacity to enter relations with other states has to be without any hard power behind it, which I think is a joke. So even according to this definition of international law, they are not promising anything, actually. They have not promised anything. It is very theoretical. We remember that Palestine used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Khilafah, until 1917. In 1916, the British agreed with the French to divide up the Middle East after World War I, according to the Sykes-Picot Accord. So the states that we now know in the Middle East, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, and Egypt and Israel, are states which were thought of and conceived just over a century ago. And we know, as we've said, that Balfour promised to the Jewish people, the Jewish Zionist people, that they would have a homeland in Palestine, it being clearly understood that nothing will be done that may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So all of that was done before Britain actually occupied Palestine, but then it did in World War I. And this is roughly what British Mandate Palestine looked like. Now, when the British had the mandate over Palestine, there were a lot of clashes between Arabs and Jews, the Jewish population that had migrated there from Europe. Britain facilitated the transport of Jews from Europe to the tune that, whereas in 1918, there were about 60,000 Jews living in Palestine. By 1948, there were over 600,000 living there. So massive influx, which the British had imported from abroad. And that created tensions. And so the British set about a commission led by Sir William Robert Peel, the grandson of the former Prime Minister of Britain. And the Peel Commission proposed the first proposal of a two-state solution. And it looks something like this. And it's pretty nonsensical, isn't it? The pink area would be Palestine. The orange area would be Israel. And the British would maintain control over Jerusalem and a route that took it to the port of Jaffa on the Mediterranean coast. Now, that was rejected by both sides at the time. And actually, the British concluded after this that, well, if they weren't going to accept this, then actually you just need to have one state and let whoever, wins elections and wins demographic control run it. By 1947, the newly formed United Nations proposed this as a peace plan. I think this map might have the colours the wrong way round, actually. Might have the colours the wrong way around, I'm not sure. But anyway, they divided it up in a bizarre way that really looks unworkable. Neither party would have an area of land which would be completely confluent with everywhere else. They're all cut off. And it was actually the Zionists that recognized the threat here. So around this sort of time, their militias started attacking Arab villages just before the British rule ended in 1948, so that they would be able to have areas of land which they would control themselves, and these areas which were bottlenecks, they would remove them, and they managed to actually get much more in 1948 than they expected through the Nakba, through their terrorist attacks. Okay, so this was the second kind of iteration. Now this is a still from a video which I wish we could watch. This is Harry Truman, who is a former president of the United States, who talks about the fact that, the Zionists wanted us just to give them the whole of Palestine, but you couldn't do it. We had to do this in small doses, he said. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both of them to be pleased. But eventually, he said very confidently, we'll have them all satisfied. So he endorsed a two-state solution quite early on, and his successor, Eisenhower, also endorsed it, basically. And that became official US policy for many decades afterwards. But by the time you get to this stage, the Oslo Peace Accords, and this is agreed in black and white in Oslo, and the Palestinian Authority signed up to this, and Israel signed up to this. You have Gaza on the west and the West Bank on the east side of the map, on the right-hand side of the map, and the West Bank, under the agreement of the Oslo Accords, would be divided up into 3 areas. The dark green areas would be under the Palestinian Authority. The light green areas would be mixed control, and the pink areas would be under Israeli control. And there are some other areas which would be not just under Israeli military rule, Jerusalem would actually be governed by the Israelis. So this is if you like, this is the template area which, when people talk about a two-state solution, that is what the Palestinian state would look like if they were being fair and just according to their own standard. And that is a very unfair deal. It is a very small amount of historic Palestine. It's balkanized and divided and it's surrounded and subjugated. It's surrounded by the Israeli military and it's subjugated. So it's an unworkable model, and it's an unreal promise, and it's unjust. It's unjust. What this map shows is that it's effectively this process that's talked about, two-state solution, has literally just led to the Palestinian part being shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So if they are given a state ever, it will be a tiny amount of historic Palestine, and it will be demilitarized. And in fact, what you can see it heading towards is what I've got on the far right, which is Greater Israel, what they call Eretz Israel, which would include parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria, and parts of Jordan, and parts of Egypt. So here is another map of that terrible, unjust area, where the orange part of the West Bank is controlled by the Israeli military, and the light grey is to be the Palestinian area, and the dark grey is joint control. But actually, that's all shifting, that's all changing. The more settlements they make, the more this colour scheme changes. And as if we didn't need anything more telling to us, just today, Israel has said it will indefinitely close the crossing between the West Bank and Jordan, the so-called Allenby Bridge. Now, that literally happened today, which gives you some idea of how independent this Palestinian state would actually be in the future. The fact that their dominant power there will be able to cut them off from every route and every avenue to any other allies around the world. The Israelis have said it's unacceptable. They're never going to accept it. So all these global powers that are talking about two states, well, actually, the main obstacle to the two-state solution is actually the Zionist occupation itself. They don't want a two-state solution. Very, very few of their politicians before October the 7th, 2023 wanted it. Even less of them do now. So I think if anyone, this is really not a credible option they put before people. And as I said, Starmer has said just this weekend, our position is clear: the Palestinian state must be demilitarized and have no army or no air force. I mean, what kind of independent state are they promising? It's just ridiculous. Unarmed. And this is a photograph of the celebration with the Palestinian authorities representative in London, Dr. Hussam Zumlot.
Well, he's now the ambassador to the court.
He is.
In London. He's now a fully fledged accredited ambassador according to the British government. So he's no longer.
Yeah, and he actually said something very interesting at the weekend. They asked him, "Is it a great day to celebrate?" He said, "Well, it's not really a day for the Palestinians to celebrate. It's you British that should be celebrating, because this is about 100 years too late." Yeah. He said,
I met him in Doha a couple of years ago, and he was a really nice guy, actually, a very down to earth chap, and he does marvelous work considering the incredible restrictions that he operates under. Yeah. So I think he's a good man.
Well, he is surrounded here by Labour MPs who are taking a selfie with him.
Yeah,
these are Labour MPs with large numbers of Muslim constituents, including Wes Streeting, the health secretary, who almost lost his seat to an independent British Palestinian candidate. Okay, so this is literally them making political capital. This is what Starmer promised them, to be able to go to their constituents and say, look, we managed to convince the Prime Minister of Britain to recognize a Palestinian state when nobody had ever done it for all the last century. And it has done nothing to help the genocide. I mean, they have overlooked all these things I've said in my article. The £500 million in arms exports, the components for the F-35 fighter jets, the intelligence cooperations, the flights over Gaza, which the RAF have been doing, flying out of air bases in Cyprus and sharing intelligence with the Five Eyes Alliance, which includes the United States, who of course will share it with the Zionist occupation. Britain supposedly supporting the UN and the International Court of Justice and other international bodies, and yet opposing their judgments in the South African case, opposing the UN General Assembly's attempts to get ceasefire resolutions. And we're supposed to forget all of that and cheer that this theoretical state has been recognized. And the other thing to bear in mind is that Britain has deep roots, deep colonial roots in the Muslim world. And over the years, Britain and France have kind of been edged out by the United States in many of these countries. And, you know, this measure that they've done this weekend in the current new world with Donald Trump, who you know, really does things in a very strange way diplomatically, it maybe gives them an opportunity to kind of edge back in with some of these leaders in the Arab and Muslim world to say, you know, we in Europe and Britain are more likely to kind of be on your side and be fairer. Whereas in truth, there isn't really a huge amount of difference between what Britain and France and Europe have done as compared to the United States. They've really all been complicit in the genocide of the last 2 years. I came across this quote from Malcolm X. Somebody called me out from using the white man quote. So this is not meant as in white, as in skin color or race. He's, I think, meaning it in the political sense of the capitalist Western world. But he's basically saying, you know, the powerful in the world will try to satisfy us with symbolic victories rather than economic equity and real justice. And this is what this is. This is a symbolic measure which people will see as a victory when it's actually no victory at all. That's just
it could be seen, I mean, I don't necessarily think you're wrong, but it could, though, be seen in hindsight from the future, who knows, as a stepping stone along on the road to justice, rather than an isolated fig leaf pretense. You know, it could be seen as a stepping stone. So it may achieve that kind of part of the trajectory towards justice in the Middle East. No. But time will tell.
No, Paul. You know, we don't need another country as weak as Lebanon in the Middle East. We have a Middle East which is potentially hugely powerful. It's the cradle of civilization. It has a young, intelligent population. It has abundant energy resources. It has very fertile land. It has a massive military in terms of the armed forces combined and the air force and combined in the Middle East. And what we don't need is another country which is as weak and as vulnerable as Lebanon, which is what a Palestinian state would be. Even if they gave the whole of the West Bank and Gaza and made a road that connected the two, which is the Israelis would never, ever, ever allow. It's just impossible to think that that's a stepping stone to anything. Really, we have to recognize the way things are. The Israelis will never allow even what I have described. They will never allow the Palestinians to have a state with any meaning, which means the only way justice will come in the Middle East is when somebody comes with a military force to rescue the people of Palestine. And then Muslim, Jew, and Christian will all have a just, fair state to live in, and a system and a civilization that would actually look after everyone rather than persecute some and give the others a good life. That's the reality. We can't kid ourselves that this is the kind of state that's actually meaningful in any way. It would be tiny, it would be vulnerable, it would be demilitarized. It's a stepping stone to nothing. It's the only thing it's a stepping stone to would be if and when it happened, all those Muslim countries that currently do not recognize Israel as a legitimate state would say, okay, we'll recognize them. And the reason we can say that with confidence is the Saudis have said that, and even the Pakistani governments have said that. The current Pakistani government has said, we would not recognize them unless there's a two-state solution. Even Imran Khan said the same thing, meaning if there's a two-state solution, they will recognize the Zionist occupation. And it brings me to this point that it's un-Islamic. When we remember what Sultan Abdul Hamid said, that he would not sell a single inch of Palestine because it wasn't his. It's Islamic land. It belongs to Muslims. So the common area of the land is the legacy and heritage of all Muslims in the world everywhere. And the privately owned land, the farms, the houses, the orchard, the olive groves, which were privately owned, are owned by Palestinian families who have been evicted from there. So nobody has the right to just give that away to somebody else and to say that, oh yeah, we recognize that somebody else can have more than half of that land. It's not our right to do that. So from an Islamic perspective, which is why Sultan Abdul Hamid came out with this statement, and he's absolutely right. This is not just somebody who's confident and bold as a political leader. He's basing this on an Islamic legal verdict that he's not allowed to do that. So we can't do that now. So we can't say that this is a stepping stone, in my view. Allah knows best, but in my view. So yeah, I just wanted to remind people that it hasn't saved a single life. This happened at the weekend, and we've had deaths and deaths and deaths for the last 3 days. Estimated, these are conservative estimates, about 100 killed and 500 injured just in 3 days. It beggars belief, actually. And we've been talking about, the world's been looking at this two-state thing. If we didn't need proof that it was a distraction, but this is the proof that it's a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And this vision I'm talking about, a workable, tried and tested just Islamic solution. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, you know, when he was talking about when the Muslims were expanding the lands, and he was saying, invite people to come to the Islamic land, Darul Islam, to migrate to the land of the Muhajirun, and inform them that if they do, and this means non-Muslim people, if they do, they shall have all the privileges and obligations of the Muslims, the Muhajirun, the Muslims who came there. So, like, he's giving people a vision that actually, you know what? The right that Muslims have, food, shelter, clothing, the protection to worship and follow their religion, all of those, the protection of their life and property, all of those rights and privileges would go to any non-Muslim that was living in the Islamic Khilafah. So, yeah, this is why I think we can't be fooled into thinking that this is something good. Like I say, even Hossam Zunlot, he was very measured. I don't think he was trying to fool anyone. No. He knows full well that you go back to Palestine, you go back to the suffering in the West Bank, you go back to the suffering in Gaza. People there aren't going to say this is a solution. They're looking for somebody to help stop this massacre, stop the injustice. And they're not going to be partying because somebody's theoretically recognized a two-state solution. And the more enlightened ones will realize that not only is that not something to recognize, but what you're recognizing is that all that land that was stolen in 1948 and 1967 is going to stay with somebody else. All of that land is going to be, the two-state solution means everything that's been stolen is going to stay with the thieves. How could that be right? How could that be just?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is your article. Do recommend people subscribe to Abdul's Substack. Many interesting articles there, and just scrolling down, you can see links to other articles that you've written over the months, including the two-state solution has never been a plausible solution. That's on the 2nd of August. Read the full story on Substack. And watch the video, it's a YouTube video actually, about the Zionist terrorists who were called as such by the British, well, the Western media, I think, of Britain and America. And there you go, subscribe to Substack there. Launched a year ago. So
perhaps you can put the link in the
sorry.
comments.
I was going to do that. I was going to say, yeah, we'll link to the Substack article in the description below, on the comments as well, so you can read that article and others as well. So thank you very much indeed for your time and your expertise and your commitment to the Palestinian cause, which is so important now and for the last 100 years, really. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Take it. Until next time.